Hello and welcome to another BowBeats synth review. In today's video we are taking a look at the MiniBrute 2S. S stands for sequencer, and that's what sets it apart from the MiniBrute 2. Basically no keyboard, only a sequencer. So let's start off with some quick facts about it. So if you don't know, this is a fully analog synthesizer from Arturia. It's a one voice monophonic synth. It has two oscillators. VCO1 is a full oscillator and VCO2 is something like the VCO3 on the MiniBrute, is more limited, and together you can do some really complex and interesting sounds. What makes it truly special is that it got 48 patch points, so you can patch a number of different parts of the synth together and create unique sounds, and also interface it connected with a Eurorack system, for example, or something like a Mod2. The synth also supports two LFOs plus sort of LFO, because you can turn the second oscillator into an LFO as well. There are no specific sub-oscillators like on the MiniBrute, for example. On the MiniBrute you have two sub-oscillators, but on the Mini you can actually use the second oscillator as a sub-oscillator if you want to. And of course what sets this apart from the Mini 2 is the sequencer, and it's a monophonic sequencer, so you'll have one channel, one MIDI channel as well to that sequencer channel. So those were some quick facts. Now I want to go over and talk about the sequencer on the MiniBrute 2S, because of course that's what sets it apart from the MiniBrute 2. So we got a little sawtooth going on here, and let's play it. Oh, and there's also oscillator 2 is on a sine wave. So let's remove you just listen to the sine. Set a square. Let's turn down the square and let's pull in the triangle. Let's listen to just a triangle. Just a square. And just a saw. The MiniBrute 2S has a 64-step sequencer, and you can very easily switch between different lengths of the sequence here, 16, 32, 48 here. You switch between different pages basically, and use the last step, 16, 32, 48, 64 to set the length, the total length of a pattern. There are 4 banks and there are 16 patterns per bank. You basically use the load here to choose any of the 16 available patterns in a bank, but remember, you can only have 16 patterns loaded at one time. So if you change bank by pressing load and turning the knob here, you basically have to save the pattern you're working on, because when you go into a different bank and you press a pattern here, so we're bank B and pattern 1, any changes that aren't saved will disappear basically, because you can only have the 16 patterns available in the memory at one point. what's the kind of, how do you use the sequencer? Well, you have the 16 steps down here. These pads here can be played. You can also use them to step sequence, and you also have the knobs over here that are used primarily to set the pitch of each step. As you can see here, this one is yellow pitch, but you can also set gate, velocity, and I think it's pressure. I'm not sure velocity or pressure, but anyway, it's two different values here that you can also use to modulate other sources using the little patch bay up here. So basically using Mod1 and Mod2 here and patching it up on the patch bay, you can send values to modulate something else per step, which is really cool. And you also have octave up and down over here. You have the transpose button over here. And with the shift, you can do a bunch of different things using these pads here. You can, for example, go forward, reverse, alternate, or random. That's for the sequencer and arpeggiator. You can also set different time divisions, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32. You can also set different scales, chromatic, major, minor, Dorian, mixo, H minor, and blues. Not entirely sure what everything is here. My music theory is a little bit rusty. And you also have a user scale here if you hold down the shift button. What else is there? Well, we have the basic controls over here: save, copy, paste, erase, also recall. We have the start and pause. You have the stop button, the record, which also enables, if you press record, it enables the step sequencer. So you can put down steps. And you have chaining. Chaining works, you hold it down, press two patterns, and you start to chain. It's very, very straightforward. You have the tap tempo, you have the sync button over here, you have the internal USB, MIDI, but also clock. So you can take clock from, say, a Eurex synth into this one here and sync it up. You also have swing. So you hold shift and you turn this little knob here and you affect the swing. Anybody's used like the drum brute, or I suppose a matrix brute or something, will feel pretty much at home here. It's very similar to the typical Arturia workflow. So let's make a little 16 step sequence here from scratch. Basically press erase, 16 to erase what's currently loaded in here. Press record, start with the first step here. So as you can see, it's very simple. Just press down the steps, set it to whatever notes you want. But you can also go into gate, and now we can use the knobs here to control the gate value. So we can just change up the gate a bit here to create some variations. I'm just going, basically going by random here. Let's listen to it. let's add some modulation by using the velocity here. So basically when you press, as you can see here, when you record mode, you press gate, you press velocity. When you press velocity, suddenly all the lights go out here, because then you have to enable for each step basically which step you want sending velocity. So at the moment here, let's remove all of them. Let's just listen. And if I enable them, you're not hearing that much of a difference, are you? The reason being that the velocity, the Mod1, is not set to anything. It's not connected. So let's connect it. Let's connect it to the frequency modulation of the filter. So that's this knob here, and it's connected to ADSR, but now we've connected it to the velocity instead. So now we can listen to it. So basically, the more velocity we're sending, the higher voltages we're sending here, will I think open up the filter is the correct word to how to describe it. But we could also go into Mod 2 here, and let's see here, going to Mod 2, and we could do some, let's do some random stuff here. I'm just sending some voltages here randomly. And we take another little cable. These are not the cables that you get with the MiniBrute 2S. These are from HOSA. They sponsored me with it for my Urac series. And I love the kind of colorful pastel colors here. So let's go from Mod 2 here into the resonance modulation that we got here. So there we go. Another thing that the sequencer version got here is the arpeggiator. So you can hold shift, or you can just turn it on, and you can hold shift and turn it on to enable hold mode. So now we've gone over the sequencer, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the synth engine. And I think I'll play a sequence and show you the different stuff on it as we go along, and hopefully that'll be educational and give you an idea of how it sounds and what it can do. VCO number 1 here is a full oscillator. You have fine tune, you have glide, you have pulse width for the square wave, you have metallizer for the triangle wave. You also have frequency modulation, and there's even small lines here connecting different knobs to show that the frequency modulation here uses VCO2 to impact the tuning of VCO number 1. Basically, it can sound something like this. So here we have a triangle waveform, and I'll increase the frequency modulation here of the pitch. And how the frequency modulation affects the pitch will of course be determined also by the settings of the VCO2, but we'll get to that as well. So let's have a little listen here to what the different waveforms sound like and the different modulations here. So let's start with the sawtooth. And we have the ultra saw amount here. Thing to note here is that some of the knobs here have blue little texts under it. It means that these knobs are connected and modulated by some other source. So for example, ultra saw amount here is connected to LFO2. So if we change LFO2, we'll change how the ultra saw comes into play. The same with the pulse width modulation. So if we're going to a square wave here and we add some pulse width and some pulse width modulation, it'll be impacted by LFO number 1 over here. Let's add some pulse width modulation to this. And we can of course play with LFO 1 here. So we are really fast rate here impacting the PVM. We can go random. Next up we have triangle. And the interesting thing is we have the metallizer. It sort of folds the top of the triangle, I think, downwards somehow to create some kind of jagged edges. I'm not entirely sure about the science behind it, but it changes up the character quite a bit. Let's listen to it. Now I spoke briefly about LFOs. There are 2 LFOs plus the oscillator number 2 that can be used as an LFO as well. These LFOs have a couple of different waveforms that you can pick between. You have the sine wave, you have the triangle, the saw, the square, and 2 different random LFOs. So there's the one with the kind of the jagged edges and one with more like smoother random curves. Also, I think also the randomness is often referred to as sample and hold. And then you have the rate knob, and you can sync it to either the sequencer or let it run freely. So depending on if you want it synced to the tempo of the sequencer or if you want it to run freely. And LFO 1 and 2 are identical. Next up we have the mixer section here, and this mixes between the different oscillators. So you have the sawtooth here, you have the square and the triangle, as well as random noise. And you also have the external input. There are actually 2 ways to input signals externally, one that goes through the entire circuitry and one that just goes basically to the output of the synth without going through the entire circuitry. So that's pretty cool. You use the patch bay to patch into the external input. So there's no how do you say it? It's a 1/4 inch. I don't know the American term for it, but yeah, there's no like big connection. You have to go through the patch bay to connect. So let's try and mix the sources together here and see what it sounds like. Next up we have VCO number 2. Basically it's a much more limited VCO, and it has its own little fader down here to set the volume, and you can tune it. There's also settings for fine tuning, and then there's the fine and there's the all. Those are used to tune it. Basically it has to do with the range, the pitch range of the oscillator, and then you have the LFO, which of course turns it into an LFO, for example. And you can, for example, you can use it here. Let's turn down the FM frequency modulation over here, and if we play now, we have it to LFO, and we can see if we can manage to create some. We should be able to create some nice pitch modulation here. So you get the idea. You can use the LFO here with the frequency modulation here to create some slight pitch modulation and go totally bonkers overboard as well. And you also have sine wave, you have sawtooth, and you have square wave on the VCO number 2 here. So let's see if we can bring it in. Let's go to fine tune. Let's try and bring it in. Let's use a sawtooth here and let's try and bring it in. Yeah, something like this. And we can listen to it by itself. Let's head over to the filter section. The filter section consists of the cutoff here, resonance, the different modes. You have low pass, you have high pass, band pass, and notch. You also have a frequency modulation here, which is connected to the ADSR. Yeah, basically your normal way of controlling the cutoff using the ADSR down here. And you also have resonance modulation, which is a little bit more unusual as kind of a standard thing on a synth. And you also have this knob here, which uses, well, basically you can control cutoff using pressure. So as we talked about earlier down in the sequencer section, you can set pressure per step in order to use this knob to increase the cutoff. We can try it out. So basically here we have pressure, hit record, you can see all these light up. And if we listen to how it sounds like now, it sounds like this. So let's increase some values here. And of course the modulation of the cutoff here, you can use the ADSR as well, so we can just play a little bit and play with it. And you can of course use LFO number 1 here with resonance modulation here. So while the ADSR envelope that you use basically to modulate stuff is a full one with attack, decay, sustain, release, you have a much smaller one for the amplitude of the entire sound, where you have attack, decay, but you also have gate, trig, ones, and loop settings here. Basically, the gate and trig has the different settings here has to do with how the sound kind of fades out, the release of the sound basically. And the ones and loop, well, obviously it loops the sound. So if I play a note and turn on loop, and this is quite cool. This is really cool actually. You can actually do reversed sounds with this. And you can almost go like kind of granular. So that's really cool. I really like the loop feature. It's not something that I've seen on that many synths, especially not analog synths, but it really can open up to make some really strange and crazy kind of rhythmic and random patterns using it. Lastly, we have the amp section and with the brute factor that we know from their other synths. So let's just try and add it and see if we can make it sound something. Yeah, you can go into totally crazy territory with this one. So basically you can really beef up the sound with the brute factor, but of course be warned, you know, you can totally destroy the sound as well. You have the global tuning, you have the master volume, which affects both the headphones and the master outputs. It's a shared control for that. And you also have attenuator 2 to amp here. Basically it lets you, let you hear a note. So you can use this, for example, to create drone type sounds if you don't want to hold a note down, for example. But you can of course also remap it using the patch bay as well. Lastly, we'll come to the patch bay, and the patch bay is just a ton of fun. And I don't want to go too in depth because then this will be like a 2-hour video, but I do want to talk about some hidden stuff that are available here, and let me just show you some of the stuff here. So for example, you have the sync over here to create those classic sync sounds, and you also have linear FM, linear frequency modulation, available here as a patch point, which is not available as a knob. So the frequency modulation we talked about before, that's exponential frequency modulation. So here are two different patch points that are actually kind of unique here. So basically the patch point is divided into blocks. So here's the VCO1 block, filter block, amp, inverter, VCO2, external input. The external input is interesting because you can go directly to master output, or you can go to the external input. The external input I showed you on the mixer, that goes through the entire analog circuitry of the synth, and the master output just goes straight to the master output. So that's two different options. And you also have, let's see here, what else do we have that we want to talk about? Yeah, you can see here that the signs here that are with the white background refers to outputs, and the text here just in white is inputs. So that's good to know. Don't connect outputs to outputs and inputs to inputs. I think that's kind of a general rule. And you have the filter, and you have the amp, and of course you can see also kind of where stuff is pre-assigned. So the frequency modulation here is pre-assigned to ADSR, but if we put something in here, put this little in here, then we have cut that preset. We have basically disabled that pre-configuration. Let's see here, what else do we have here that is really interesting? Well, we have the attenuators. The attenuators are interesting because they sort of tame the signal. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's actually quite a nice utility feature. So basically you can go from, say, the LFO1 to the attenuator in here. So go from LFO1 into the attenuator, and then we can take another level, and you go from the out of the attenuator to, say, let's say the filter here. And what you've done now is that you've set it so, firstly we have disabled the ADSR affecting the frequency modulation, but you've also set it so the LFO1 here, the output of LFO1 is getting tamed, so it won't affect the sound as much, and then it goes out here into the frequency modulation. So that's just a nice bit of utility that you can actually use, and you can use it with other gear as well, of course, to sort of tame it. It's still being connected because I showed you earlier that attenuator 1 and 2 knobs, and those knobs are used to sort of set the amount. So you're basically using those knobs to set the amount of modulation from the LFO in this case. So that's a nice bit of utility. And of course you have the MIDI and the sequencer stuff here as well. So I didn't want to go too in depth on this because the video is long already. I might do a follow-up video talking more about this. If you want to, please leave a little comment if that's something you really want to see. And yeah, I think this is basically my rundown of the synth engine on the MiniBrute 2S. So this was my review of the MiniBrute 2S. I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any questions, just leave them down in the comment section. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, and you can support the work I do over on patreon.com/bowbeats. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Arturia for hooking me up with an early unit to check out, and I hope you all have a great week.